The war had ended, but the galaxy was forever changed. The Zorethians, once proud and isolated, had learned the true meaning of strength through their alliance with the humans. What began as an unexpected partnership had blossomed into something far more powerful than either species had anticipated. Captain Calloway stood on the observation deck of his ship, gazing out at the stars. His ship, like many others, was battered and worn from the long battle. The war had taken its toll, but now there was peace. The galaxy was safe, and the Zorethians owed their survival to the humans who had come when no one else would. In the days following the final battle, the Zorethian capital had begun to rebuild. The once crumbling empire was now filled with hope. Cities were being restored, and the people began to heal. But the most important thing that had changed wasn't just the physical rebuilding. It was the shift in their way of thinking. The Zorethians had always believed that strength came from perfection. Their technology, their tactics, their discipline, all had been designed with the idea of flawless execution. But the humans had shown them something else. Strength wasn't just about being perfect. It was about determination, adaptability, and the will to keep fighting, no matter what. General Veckler had seen that change firsthand. He had watched as his people, once skeptical of the humans, had embraced their unorthodox methods. Now he stood before the Zorethian Council, his voice filled with pride. "The humans have given us something we never knew we needed," he said. "They've shown us how to fight with heart, not just with technology. We are stronger because of them." The council members nodded, their expressions thoughtful. The respect between the two species was clear now more than ever. Meanwhile, on Earth, the victory had not gone unnoticed. The humans who had fought in the battle were celebrated as heroes. But Calloway, like many others, didn't want the praise. The victory was for the galaxy, not just for humanity. He had seen firsthand what it meant to fight for something greater than yourself, and that was what kept him going. The humans and Zorethians worked together to ensure the peace they had won would last. Their alliance became the foundation for a new era, one where species from different corners of the galaxy would unite in the face of common threats. There would always be challenges, but the humans and Zorethians had proven that anything was possible when they worked together. As the human fleet prepared to return home, Calloway stood on the deck of his ship, watching the Zorethian world grow smaller in the distance. He knew that the war was over, but it wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something new. The galaxy had changed. The humans had come to the rescue when no one else would, and in doing so, they had earned the trust of a species they had never met before. They had shown the galaxy that humans were more than just terrifying warriors. They were allies, friends, and heroes. With a sense of quiet pride, Calloway turned to his crew. "Let's go home," he said. "The future's waiting." And with that, the human fleet set course for Earth, leaving behind a legacy that would be remembered for centuries to come. The battle was over, but the scars of war remained. The Zorethians had been saved, their empire secured, but the cost had been high. Human and Zorethian forces had fought together, side by side, against an enemy that seemed unbeatable. Yet now, as the dust settled and the last remnants of the enemy's fleet drifted into the void, the true weight of their victory began to sink in. Captain Calloway stood on the deck of his ship, watching as the stars passed by, his mind filled with thoughts of the battle. It was quiet now, too quiet. The usual hum of battle had faded, and all that was left were the memories of the struggle. The soldiers who had fought with him were gone, their bodies left behind on the battlefield, their bravery never to be forgotten. The Zorethian capital had been saved, but there was still work to be done. The empire needed to rebuild, and the alliance between the humans and Zorethians, forged in the heat of battle, needed to be strengthened. Veckler, the Zorethian general, stood beside him, his expression solemn. He had led his people to victory, but the victory felt hollow. The loss of so many soldiers weighed heavily on him. The battle had been won, but at what price? "We did it," Veckler said, his voice quiet. but it feels like we've lost more than we've gained." Calloway nodded, his face hard. "War always feels like that. You win, but you lose too. We did what we had to do." The Zorethian general didn't reply at first, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Then he turned to Calloway, his voice filled with respect. "I was wrong about you, human. About your people. You didn't fight like we thought you would. You fought harder." Calloway's eyes met Veckler's, and for the first time, he saw something more than just a military leader. He saw a man who had lost, who had fought for the survival of his people, and who had come to respect his allies for their resilience and bravery. "We fight for survival, just like you," Calloway said. "We don't have the luxury of losing. And when things get tough, we push harder." The two men stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of their shared experience hanging in the air between them. There was no more need for words. The bond between the humans and Zorethians was now unspoken but undeniable. Back on the Zorethian homeworld, a ceremony was held to honor the fallen. Both human and Zorethian soldiers were remembered, their sacrifices marked by a memorial that would stand for generations. It was a moment of reflection, a moment to acknowledge the price they had all paid for peace. As Calloway stood among the crowd, he saw the respect in the eyes of the Zorethian leaders. They had learned, over the course of the battle, that humanity's strength didn't lie in its technology or its military might. It lay in its determination, its ability to adapt, and its refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds. The Zorethian Empire was safe, and the humans had proven they were more than just a terrifying force. They were a force for good. And as the warships prepared to leave, Calloway felt a sense of pride, knowing that the alliance between their species would be remembered for generations. It wasn't just the victory they had won, it was the future they had created, one where humans and Zorethians stood together, stronger than ever. The final battle was over. The enemy had retreated, broken and defeated. The once powerful fleet that had terrorized the galaxy was now nothing more than a shattered shell of what it had been. The Zorethian Empire had been saved, and the humans, who had once seemed so out of place among the stars, had proven themselves as true allies. But victory had come at a heavy price. Captain Calloway stood on the observation deck of his ship, staring out at the wreckage of the battlefield. The fire and smoke still lingered in the air, a reminder of the fierce struggle they had just endured. His ship, though heavily damaged, had survived. But the human fleet had lost many good soldiers. Their sacrifice had secured the win, but it didn't make the victory feel any less bitter. "We've won," Calloway muttered to himself. "But at what cost?" Beside him, General Veckler watched the same scene, his face unreadable. The Zorethians had lost comrades too. But they had gained something they hadn't expected: respect for the humans. Their battle had been brutal, and the humans had fought with an intensity that was unmatched. They had been terrifying in their fury, but it was that same terror that had turned the tide. "We did what we had to do," Veckler said, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of the losses. "No one else would have done it. Only the humans would fight like this, without hesitation, without fear." Calloway turned to look at Veckler, a small but tired smile crossing his face. "Yeah, we don't always do things the clean way, but we get results." The two men stood in silence for a while, watching as the last of the enemy ships flood into the darkness of space. The battle had been long, exhausting, and brutal. But now, the galaxy was safe once again, thanks to the unexpected alliance between the Zorethians and humans. As the fleet began its journey home, the mood was somber but filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment. The Zorethians had learned that there was more to strength than just technology and tactics. The humans had shown them that raw determination and an unwillingness to give up could be just as powerful. The human and Zorethian soldiers who had fought side by side shared brief moments of camaraderie. They had been enemies only days before, but now, they had forged a bond that went beyond the battlefield. They had fought together, built together, and survived together. And in the end, that made them brothers in arms. Back on Zorethian homeworld, the leaders of the Empire held a ceremony to honor the fallen. The human soldiers who had fought beside them were celebrated as heroes. It was a strange sight. Zorethians, who had once thought of humans as chaotic and unpredictable, now standing side by side with them, their heads held high in respect. Vekler stood at the front of the ceremony, his voice strong and clear as he addressed both the Zorethians and the humans. "Today, we honor those who fought to save us," he said, "and we thank those who helped us when no one else would. The humans have earned our respect, and we will never forget their bravery." As the crowd cheered, Calloway stood off to the side, watching the scene unfold. He had come to this battle expecting to save a species he knew little about, but what he found was more than just allies. He had found respect, and in that respect, he saw the true power of humanity. The victory wasn't just about winning a war. It was about proving that, when pushed to the edge, humans could be the ones to save the galaxy. The enemy was on the run, but they weren't defeated yet. Though their command center had been crippled and their fleet scattered, they were still a powerful force, desperate to reclaim what they had lost. The humans and Zorethians knew that the final battle would be their greatest test. This was the moment that would decide the fate of the galaxy, and they couldn't afford to fail. Captain Calloway stood on the command deck of his ship, the tension in the air palpable. The enemy had regrouped, and their forces were assembling for one last push. He had faced countless battles before, but this one felt different. This time, the stakes were higher, and the weight of his decision rested on the shoulders of both human and Zorethian forces. "We need to strike first," Calloway said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "If we let them regroup, we'll lose everything. We hit them hard, and we hit them now." General Vekler, standing beside him, nodded. The Zorethians had fought alongside the humans through countless skirmishes, and they had seen the strength in their allies' fighting style. The human way was unorthodox, but it had proven effective. Now, it was time to combine that with the Zorethian precision and advanced technology. "We'll need to act quickly," Vekler said, his voice calm but serious. "Our forces are ready. We fight together." The two commanders exchanged a glance. They had come a long way since the first uneasy meeting between their people. The Zorethians, once skeptical of the humans, had come to see their allies in a new light. Together, they had learned to combine their strengths: brute force with strategy, chaos with order. The battle began in earnest. The humans led the charge, their ships darting in and out of enemy fire, disrupting their formations with quick, unpredictable strikes. The Zorethians provided backup, their powerful weapons and shields holding the line and giving the humans the openings they needed to strike. The enemy was caught off guard, and for the first time, they seemed to falter. But the battle wasn't won yet. The enemy commander, a ruthless and cold leader, rallied his forces for one last desperate assault. His fleet gathered at the center of the battlefield, a final stand against the combined might of the human and Zorethian forces. The enemy ships fired in unison, a wall of destruction aimed directly at the human and Zorethian forces. The air was filled with blinding light and deafening explosions. The battlefield became a chaotic mess of fire and smoke as both sides fought fiercely for control. Amid the chaos, Captain Calloway's ship was hit. The explosion sent the ship spinning, and for a moment, it seemed like everything was lost. But Calloway, ever the survivor, quickly regained control of his ship. He wasn't going to let this be the end. "Move in," he ordered, his voice booming over the comms. "We finish this now." With a roar of engines, the human and Zorethian forces pushed forward together. Calloway led the charge, his ship cutting through the enemy lines with laser precision. The Zorethians followed, their ships blasting through the remaining enemy defenses, relentless in their pursuit. In the end, it was the combined might of the humans and Zorethians that won the day. The enemy, unable to withstand the coordinated assault, was forced to retreat. The final battle was over. As the dust settled and the last of the enemy forces fled, the human and Zorathian fleets stood victorious. Calloway and Veckler stood side by side, looking out at the remains of the battlefield. "We did it," Calloway said, his voice filled with exhaustion and pride. Veckler nodded. "Together, we did." The war was over. The Zorathian Empire had been saved, and it was thanks to the unexpected alliance between the terrifying humans and the proud Zorathians. The battle had reached a critical point. The enemy, relentless and powerful, had seemed unstoppable, crushing everything in their path. The Zorathian Empire was on the edge of collapse, and the humans, still seen as outsiders by many, were their last hope. But now, after days of fighting together, the tide was beginning to turn. Captain Calloway stood on the bridge of his ship, his eyes focused on the battlefield below. He had seen countless battles before, but something about this one felt different. The Zorathians, once unsure of the humans' methods, had begun to embrace them. Their soldiers had adopted human tactics, speed, unpredictability, and the willingness to take risks. And it was working. The enemy was no longer marching forward with confidence. They were starting to falter. "General Veckler," Calloway said, turning to his Zorathian ally, who stood beside him. "It's time. We need to hit them where it hurts." Veckler nodded, his face grim but resolute. "I agree. We've learned much from you, human. Now, it's time to show them what we can do together." The plan was simple but dangerous. The enemy had a stronghold deep in their territory, a command center that controlled their operations. If they could take it out, they would cripple the enemy's ability to coordinate and fight back. But getting there wouldn't be easy. The enemy's defenses were strong, and they had a vast fleet waiting to stop any attack. It was a gamble, but it was their best chance. The humans and Zorathians moved quickly, launching a surprise assault on the enemy's position. As they charged forward, the humans led the way with their hit-and-run tactics, creating chaos and confusion. The Zorathians, using their advanced technology and discipline, provided the support needed to hold the line. Together, they formed an unstoppable force. As the battle raged, Calloway's squadron fought with a fury that matched the enemy's own. They dodged incoming fire, firing back with precision, targeting weak points in the enemy's fleet. The Zorathians followed suit, using their weapons and shields to protect the human forces and create openings for their attack. The enemy was beginning to break. Their ships, once so confident, were now retreating, their formations falling apart as they tried to regroup. The humans and Zorathians pressed on, refusing to give up. Every move was calculated, every step taken with the knowledge that failure meant destruction. And then it happened. In the heart of the enemy stronghold, Calloway and his team infiltrated the command center. They planted explosives in key locations, sabotaging the enemy's ability to repair and regroup. The Zorathians, following the humans' lead, launched a final assault, breaking through the enemy's last line of defense. The enemy was in full retreat. Their once impressive fleet was now scattered and broken, their command structure in ruins. The humans and Zorathians had done the impossible. They had turned the tide. As the dust settled and the last of the enemy ships fled, Calloway stood on the deck of his ship, looking out at the now quiet battlefield. Veckler joined him, a rare smile crossing his face. "We did it," Veckler said, his voice filled with awe. Calloway nodded, his expression hard but proud. "Yeah, we did. And we couldn't have done it without both of us." The Zorathians, once skeptical of the humans, now recognized them as true allies. They had not just helped them win a battle, they had helped them win the war. The tide had turned, and for the first time in days, there was hope for the Zorathian Empire. As the days passed and the battle intensified, the Zorathians and humans found themselves working closer together. At first, it had been awkward. Two very different species, each with their own way of fighting and thinking. The Zorathians had been used to their precise, structured warfare, while the humans were chaotic, unpredictable, and ruthless in their tactics. But slowly, something began to shift. It started with Captain Calloway and General Veckler. At first, Veckler had seen Calloway's confidence as arrogance, his disinterest in traditional tactics as a lack of discipline. But the more they'd fought side by side, the more Veckler began to understand the value in the human way of doing things. Calloway, in turn, began to see the Zorathians' discipline and strategic thinking as a strength, not a weakness. It wasn't long before they realized they were learning from each other. One evening, as the two commanders stood together on the deck of the human flagship, overlooking the battlefield below, Veckler spoke. "You've shown us something," he said quietly, watching the distant explosions light up the sky. "Something we didn't understand before." Calloway glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "What's that?" "How to fight when there's nothing left to lose," Veckler said. "Your tactics are brutal, but they work." Calloway gave a short, almost reluctant smile. "We don't waste time with fancy plans. We just do what's necessary." The two stood in silence for a moment, watching the smoke rise from the battlefield. The alien sky above them was filled with the faint hum of distant warships and the sound of lasers cutting through the air. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, both of them felt a sense of hope. The humans had always fought with a sense of urgency. They weren't interested in glory or honor. They fought because they had no other choice. It was in their nature to push through, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. And now, the Zorathians were beginning to understand that. The bond between the two forces grew stronger. The humans, with their brutal, direct style, began to teach the Zorathians how to think on their feet, how to adapt when plans fell apart. And the Zorathians, with their more methodical approach, showed the humans how to plan and prepare for the long term. They worked together, combining their strengths and learning from each other. It wasn't just the commanders who felt the change. The soldiers on both sides began to form bonds too. The human and Zorathian soldiers fought side by side in the trenches, in the air, and in the streets of the city. They covered each other's backs, shared resources, and found common ground in their fight for survival. The humans, once viewed as unpredictable and terrifying, were becoming allies, trusted, respected, and even admired by their Zorathian comrades. And the Zorathians, once seen as distant and cold, were now recognized as strong and reliable partners in the fight. It was the beginning of an unlikely, but powerful, alliance. And as they prepared for the next wave of the enemy, both sides knew one thing for certain. Together, they stood a chance. The battle raged on, and the Zorathians watched in awe as the humans fought alongside them. The enemy, a vast, cold force that seemed to overwhelm everything in its path, had no answer for the sheer unpredictability of the human approach. The Zorathians, accustomed to using sophisticated and precise technology, were amazed to see how the humans used their more rudimentary tools in ways that were impossible to predict. At first, it seemed as if the human soldiers were throwing their weapons and resources away carelessly. Their ships, far less advanced than the Zorathian fleet, charged directly into the enemy's line of fire without hesitation. The Zorathian commanders, watching from the sidelines, were certain this reckless behavior would lead to disaster. But to their surprise, the humans didn't falter. They reacted quickly, with an almost animalistic instinct. While the Zorathian ships relied on intricate designs and complex weaponry, the humans relied on speed and adaptability. Where the Zorathians used their advanced shields to block incoming fire, the humans used sheer numbers and hit-and-run tactics, dodging and weaving through the enemy's defense systems with terrifying precision. Captain Calloway was in the thick of the action, leading his squadron with ruthless efficiency. His ship was far from the best in the fleet, but it was fast, and it was built for survival. He weaved through enemy fire, firing back with an unpredictable mix of shots, causing chaos in the enemy's ranks. "This is how we fight," Calloway said over the comms to his squad. "Don't worry about making it perfect. Just make it count." Veckler, watching from a nearby command station, could barely believe his eyes. The humans weren't just fighting. They were breaking the enemy's lines by outsmarting them. Their attacks were quick and vicious, catching the enemy off guard at every turn. As the battle wore on, the Zorathians began to see the true value of human ingenuity. Where their own high-tech weapons could easily be countered by the enemy's advanced shields, the humans adapted. They used basic explosives and simple weapons to create diversions, distracting the enemy long enough to land a decisive blow. The humans had no interest in playing a fair game. They just wanted to win, no matter what it took. Vekler, who had once looked down on the humans' raw, unpolished style, now saw their true power. It was a kind of chaotic brilliance, where rules didn't matter, and survival was the only goal. The Zorathians had been too focused on perfection, too obsessed with the idea of winning battles through flawless execution. The humans, on the other hand, were willing to embrace the messiness of war and use it to their advantage. The most surprising part of the human tactics, however, was their ability to think outside the box. In the middle of the chaos, a small human team infiltrated the enemy's shipyard and set off a series of explosions. It wasn't a sophisticated plan, just a series of well-timed, simple actions. But it crippled the enemy's ability to repair and build, forcing them to retreat. "What did I tell you?" Captain Calloway's voice crackled through the comms. "It's not about how you fight. It's about how fast you think. Keep them guessing." The Zorathians, seeing the human success, were now fully invested in the battle. They followed Calloway's lead, learning to think less about their advanced technology and more about using whatever was at hand. Together, they were proving that brains, not just brawn, could win the day. The Zorathians had never worked with humans before, and their first encounter was a shock. The humans didn't greet them with grand speeches or formal ceremonies. Instead, they simply got to work. Their behavior was blunt, almost cold. For the Zorathians, who were accustomed to diplomacy and tradition, this was hard to understand. General Vekler stood at the front of the human contingent, his eyes scanning the human soldiers as they moved into position. Their armor was not sleek or elegant like his own, but heavy and worn. Their weapons, too, were rougher, but there was something in the way they carried them. Something that suggested these humans were capable of more than appearances let on. The human captain, James Calloway, approached Vekler, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "We need to move quickly," Calloway said, his voice firm. "This enemy won't wait for us to get our act together. We need a plan, and we need it now." Vekler studied him for a moment, unsure what to make of the captain. He had expected to be greeted by a leader, perhaps someone who would try to win his trust with words. But Calloway wasn't interested in diplomacy. He was interested in action. "You are not like other species," Vekler said, his voice low. "You don't seem to care about formalities." Calloway's lips twitched in the smallest of smiles. "Formality won't save us. Action will." Vekler didn't know whether to admire or be frustrated by this attitude. But as he looked at the humans, his frustration turned to curiosity. They didn't appear intimidated by the Zorathians' high-tech weaponry or their polished uniforms. Instead, they acted as though they belonged here, as though this was just another battlefield to them. "All right," Vekler said, after a moment's pause. "We'll follow your lead, but you must understand, we fight as one. Our survival depends on our unity." Calloway nodded. "Understood. We'll fight together. No time for anything else." The humans set to work almost immediately. They worked quickly, placing weapons, organizing supplies, and preparing for battle. The Zorathians, still unsure about this strange partnership, followed suit, albeit more slowly and with far more questions. The humans' methods didn't make sense to them, but Vekler knew they had no choice but to trust them. As the hours passed, the two forces prepared for the inevitable conflict with the enemy. The humans showed no signs of fear, even though they were clearly outnumbered and outgunned. It was then that Vekler started to see what made the humans so feared throughout the galaxy. Their courage wasn't born from strength alone. It was born from an unshakable will. When the enemy finally arrived, a fearsome, dark fleet filling the sky, the humans didn't hesitate. They fought with savage determination, charging into battle as if they had nothing to lose. Veklar watched in awe as the human soldiers used tactics that were unpredictable but effective. They didn't try to match the enemy in power. They outsmarted them. The Zorathians, at first unsure of the humans' unconventional methods, quickly saw the value in them. The humans didn't wait for permission to fight. They simply fought, and they fought hard. In that moment, Veklar realized something. The humans weren't just terrifying because of their reputation. They were terrifying because they didn't play by anyone else's rules. And that was exactly what the Zorathians needed. The humans' fleet arrived in the Zorathian skies like a storm, their ships massive and imposing. To the Zorathians, who had once commanded the most advanced and powerful technology in the galaxy, the sight was both shocking and confusing. These ships were not the sleek, high-tech war vessels they had expected. They were worn and patched up, with thick armor and an almost chaotic design. The human ships seemed clumsy compared to the polished elegance of the Zorathian fleet. A Zorathian commander, General Veklar, stood on the observation deck of the capital's command center, staring out at the sky. His sharp features were drawn with concern, his eyes narrowing as the human ships descended. He had heard of humans, of course, but never expected them to be the ones to answer their distress call. "They're here," Veklar muttered to himself, his voice a mixture of disbelief and caution. But why? Why these creatures? Around him, his officers exchanged uncertain glances. They had been desperate for help, but now that it had arrived, they were unsure whether it was a blessing or a curse. The humans were unpredictable, often acting in ways that didn't make sense to other species. Their reputation for being terrifying and merciless was well known, but it was also mixed with stories of surprising bravery and determination. On the lead human ship, the captain, a man named James Calloway, stood at the helm, overseeing the operation. He was no stranger to danger, and the tense silence in the command room only sharpened his senses. The mission was clear: save the Zorathians, no matter the cost. He had fought in wars across multiple galaxies, but this was different. The Zorathians were a proud species, and humans were known for their rough approach. But Calloway knew one thing for sure: if anyone could get the job done, it was humans. "Get ready," Calloway said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "We're about to show them what humanity is capable of." As the humans' fleet landed on the Zorathian homeworld, the atmosphere was tense. The Zorathians had never seen humans up close. When they disembarked from their ships, they didn't do so with grace or ceremony. Instead, the humans marched in, clad in heavy armor, weapons in hand. Their faces were hard, their movements swift and calculated. They were not here for a diplomatic meeting. They were here for battle. General Veklar met with the human commander, and their first exchange was as expected, short and blunt. Calloway didn't waste time with pleasantries, and Veklar, though still skeptical, understood that the humans were their last hope. "We don't have time for formalities," Calloway said. "We're here to fight, not to talk. You want to live. Follow my lead." Veklar couldn't hide his surprise at the humans' directness. The Zorathians prided themselves on their refined diplomacy, but here the humans offered nothing but raw determination. It was terrifying, and it was exactly what they needed. As the human forces began to deploy, the Zorathians were forced to acknowledge the truth. Despite their doubts, the humans were the only ones willing to step in when everyone else had backed away. The terrifying humans had arrived, and now they would fight together, whether they were ready or not. In the farthest reaches of the galaxy, the Zorathian Empire was on the brink of destruction. A powerful, mysterious enemy had appeared without warning, a force unlike anything they had ever encountered. Their fleet, once the pride of the galaxy, had been shattered in mere days. The Zorathians were a proud, advanced species, with technologies beyond what most others could even imagine. Yet, in the face of this unknown threat, they found themselves helpless. Desperation spread quickly among their leaders. There was no one left to turn to, no allies who could help them fight this unstoppable force. Their once mighty defenses had been broken down, and the enemy advanced with frightening speed. The Zorathians needed help, but who could they trust? Their last option was to send a distress signal to the galactic community. For years, they had kept to themselves, refusing to involve others in their affairs. But now, with their empire crumbling, they had no choice. The Zorathian leaders debated for hours, weighing the consequences of their plea. Finally, the decision was made. The distress signal would be sent, and they would hope for a miracle. The signal reached the vast corners of space, bouncing off countless satellites and star systems, its message a cry for help. "We are the Zorathian Empire. We face an enemy unlike any we have encountered. We need aid. If you are out there, help us." The plea echoed through the stars, and the Zorathians waited. They knew their chances were slim. Most of the galaxy's powerful species had their own agendas, their own struggles. The thought that anyone would risk their own safety to help the Zorathians was a long shot, but there was nothing else they could do. Days passed, and the situation grew worse. Cities burned, ships were destroyed, and more lives were lost with each passing hour. The Zorathians began to lose hope, doubting that any help would arrive in time. They had placed their faith in the galaxy's leaders, yet it felt as if they had been forgotten. Then the answer came, unexpected, loud, and shocking. A fleet of ships appeared in the sky above their capital. They were not the sleek, elegant warships the Zorathians had hoped for. No, these ships were different. They were rough, patched-up vessels, their designs crude and functional, but undeniably powerful. The human fleet had arrived. The Zorathians had never dealt with humans before, and many of them had heard terrifying tales of their ways. Humans were known for their unpredictability, their raw determination, and their unorthodox methods. The Zorathians had heard whispers about how humans had changed the course of battles with sheer force and willpower alone. But now, those stories were real, and they were coming to their rescue. The Zorathian leaders watched in disbelief as the human ships descended. They had expected an elegant, precise intervention, not this ragtag group of warriors. Would they be enough to turn the tide? Or would they, too, fail like everyone else? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The Zorathians were about to experience what it meant to be rescued by the most terrifying species in the galaxy.